that trend towards urbanisation is also going to accelerate. Back in 1950, 30% of the world's population lived in cities. By 2050, it will be 70%. So in Africa, the number of people living in cities currently will go from about 35% of the entire population in Africa to over 70%. So there'll be about 1 billion people. And increasingly we're seeing the rise of megacities, where there are multiple cities in different countries with with a number of residents over 1 million each. So in Pakistan you have 8 cities of over 1 million, 12 in Mexico, in China 100 cities with populations of 1 million or more. And many of those people living in cities are going to be living in slums. This is a real challenge for development economics and aid programming, because historically, particularly in the not-for-profit sector and NGOs, we've tended to focus in programs that reach out to rural communities. Now the need will still be there to work with rural communities, but increasingly we're going to have to be working with communities in slums. And in Brazil, the government has already, for many years now, been designing programs to try and lift people out of poverty in slums. And we might draw Margaret in question time just to talk about her recent trip there. And with some success, they're actually targeting programs paying a basic payment to families, generally to female-headed households, to the payment in return for sending their children to school and for having basic health treatment. So there's opportunities as well to actually, when populations are concentrated, for governments to actually target programs more. There's obviously the economic opportunities that cities bring. And increasingly we're going to see large flows of migration as well. And that's another trend that, again, by some estimates, some social scientists argue that the flows of remittances of people migrating, of refugee communities, and sending back money to their families in the countryside from cities or from developed countries to underdeveloped countries is equal to the entire flow of official global assistance, development assistance aid. So what you can see is that aid is only going to be a very small part of the picture here. We're going to need other tools to facilitate the flow of that income. In the Pacific, a very simple thing that's been done in the past year by the Australian government is to work with Australian banks to actually reduce the cost of transferring money. For many years, Pacific Islanders working in Australia and New Zealand had to rely on the Western Union to remit money. And so for every $100 that you might remit, it cost you 20 bucks. It's extortionate. So this is something that in recent times there's been some engagement with the Australian banking system to reduce that cost of moving money, which is good. We also need to reduce the barriers of movement of people as well, because as we get that demographic shift of rise of youthful populations in developing countries and an ageing of populations in developed countries, the taxation base is going to shift in countries like Australia, and there's going to be more pressure on a smaller workforce. And so migration is going to become increasingly important. For some years now, New Zealand has had a temporary labour scheme where workers from Pacific Island countries come and work in the fruit industry. It's been very successful. It stands in stark contrast to a similar scheme that has been started more recently in Australia, where it's been conspicuously unsuccessful for a variety of reasons, which we won't go into now. But merely to point out that these types of schemes are actually going to be very important in the future and offer another way of Australia and developed countries like Australia assisting people in developing countries and meeting some of our needs by bringing in youthful workforces who may be unskilled but are happy to do that unskilled labour, and to provide a flow of remittances back to their communities for their benefit.